All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of A Sip of Knowledge with Marty Duffy, Liz Rhoades, and Lou Bryson. Plus, this week, special guest Andy Weir, the U.S. brand leader for Aberlour single malt Scotch whiskey. I will let your hosts give a much more extended, formal introduction to Andy in just a moment. Before I turn things over there, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co. Just want to point out a couple of ways you can interact with your hosts and their guests today throughout the show. To your right, as always, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from. It's always cool to see that. If you have a question at any point during the show, there's a little button at the bottom that says Ask a Question. So just press that, type your question in. I'll be keeping an eye out for those and relaying them to your hosts over here. And last but not least, feel free to invite your friends to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes it really easy to do that. But with all that said, Marty, Liz, Lou, I'll turn things over to you now.
Thanks there, Will. You're like a careless whisper from a close friend. Thanks. Hey, and by the way, can you make that share button into a share bono button? That'd be just kind of weird. I kind of like that. Anyways, I'm Martin Duffy. I am the former senior master of whiskey, Andy. Again, do not be intimidated by that. Senior former master of whiskey from Diageo for 14 freaking years. Good chunk of my life. And then 18 glorious months as the national brand ambassador for Benedictine and B&B. 8 years as co-producer of the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo. And for the last 6.5 glorious years, probably the best of my life, guys in Scotland, I have been the sole brand representative for Glencairn Crystal. Look at that! Sweet.
4 for 4.
Woo!
It's going to be a good week.
That's good, yeah. It's always a good sign. It's like finding a 4-leaf clover. It's really good. Lizard?
Yes. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. Happy 420, if that's what you're into. I'm Liz Rhoades, technical distiller and spirit consultant. Have just over a decade of experience across the alcoholic beverage sector. Working on a variety of spirits and substrates, including beer, rum, vodka, but my particular favorite and expertise, of course, is in whiskey, because that's what we're all here for every day, right?
Every day.
Every single day. Day in, day out.
Most of my career at a small little company called Diageo. Maybe you've heard of it. But now I'm currently founder and principal at Spirit Safe Consulting. And hey, want to know more about that? If you scroll down to About the Host section, there's actually a little link to my website. So click on it. Check it out. Lou?
Thank you, Liz. I'm Lou Bryson. I'm a whiskey writer. I've been doing that for, almost 25 years now. I was the managing editor of Whiskey Advocate magazine for 20 years. Now I plug my humble writings, Whiskey Masterclass, and Tasting Whiskey. I know it's a
tome.
I'm also a senior drinks writer for the Daily Beast website, and today I am finishing off a miniature of Glenlivet 12, and then I'll be getting into this Maryland craft whiskey, Sangfroid, a 9-month-old rye, which is going to be quite a switch.
Well, Lou, I'm going to see that, and I'm going to raise you a Little Mill 40-year-old.
Oh!
Boom!
Oh.
It's not a bottle, Marty.
This is
No,
how
I didn't get a full bottle this time.
This is how the Scots originally bottled their whiskey back in the old days, Liz.
Put it in a bandolier.
Yeah. So that's right. Like little bullets. Quick, give me another whiskey.
All
right.
Old action bartender.
So this week, everyone, we are so pleased to have a person I consider the happiest person in the whiskey industry. Anytime you see him, he's constantly smiling. Reminds me a little of Chandler from Friends. Just a little bit with Scottish.
You mentioned that last week, I think. He actually means it.
She doesn't. Liz doesn't know Friends.
That's okay. I'm all right with that.
I know, but the thing, it's ubiquitous. I didn't even watch it. I know everything about it. Oh my God. Anyways.
No. Andy can tell me all about it.
Andy will tell you all about it. He probably starred in it. He probably starred in it. He was a young actor, a kid, just with a dream in the heart and a twinkle in his eye, and his dreams were dashed, probably due to a lot of scandals in Hollywood. But then scooted on over into the whiskey industry, where he has been for about at least a decade, if not longer. And some of the stuff you've done, Andrew, is really impressive. Some not so impressive, but we'll skip over that.
Good idea.
It's really fascinating. But currently, he is the brand director for a wonderful single malt named Aberlour single malt Scotch, from Scotland.
See?
Andrew Weir, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing good, Marty. I thought you promised not to do the So I Married an Expert.
I never keep my promises.
Actually, I'm pretty sure that Liz and I promised you he would keep doing it. I'm reasonably certain of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you think I'm happy, Marty.
Well, I didn't say you seem happy. You give out the outward appearance. You could be very sad. You're crying on the inside. But see, this is what you're going to see is Andy. Hey, how are you? Hey. So Andrew, now, like I said, you started off as a young actor, a child actor, which was very surprising. And I'm sorry, what was your big role as a child?
I had some sausage rolls, some bacon rolls. That was probably part of my problem. No, I did a lot of stuff that most of it no one ever saw. The term straight to video comes to mind for a lot of my career.
Wow. You're Bruce Willis.
I started off on a kind of a high note with a movie that I played a very small part in that did very well, won 5 Oscars, and a lot of people seem to still enjoy it and still talk about it. So I was a very small part. I was a decent sized part that got cut down to a very small part in the movie
Braveheart.
That's nice red wig and blue dress.
But you were also the Artful Dodger.
I was prior to that, yeah. I was the Artful Dodger in a production of Oliver.
And Will, if you can bring up the Jack Wilde version of the Artful Dodger at some point during the show, I think it would be a wonderful musical break. So if you could find that. So Andy, tell us, I mean, how'd you get from acting into booze, though? If you read about a lot of actors,
a short path.
Yeah, really, there's really a stumble. It's just
yeah, really, it's good. Yeah. Surprised you didn't go right into heroin.
It was an interesting path. I had been an actor from the age of 13, a jobbing actor into my teens and into my early 20s, and I went traveling around the world. And I went with some friends, all of whom had just graduated from university with engineering degrees, and they all got jobs in Sydney, Australia. We were sitting down in Sydney for 6 months, and everyone got a job, working in engineering or whatever. And I thought, well, I can't get a job in, an Australian soap opera, Home and Away or Neighbours. Look, my job opportunities were quite narrow, and I got a job at the tourism office, answering the phones, giving information, mainly on Scotland, because as an actor, I'd toured all over Scotland. I was lucky enough to see every corner of Scotland, the Hebrides, Orkney, Shetland, all the northwest, northeast. So I'd seen all of Scotland. So I was kind of brought in as a subject matter expert, I think, on Scotland. And that led to a job in New York, actually, which I'd never expected. And I was offered this position working in the tourism office in New York. And I think I'm the first person ever to move to New York to get out of show business. So that might have to go on my tombstone. And that job in New York, I found myself doing a lot of, because I've got a background in doing public speaking and burns and all that sort of stuff. So the tourism office would ask me to show up and do a lot of that stuff. And that actually led to Mr. Ian Miller, who many of us are familiar with, this Spanish, the great Ian Miller. He, in 2007, asked me if I ever thought about a job in whiskey. And then that kind of led to me getting picked up as a brand ambassador for William Grant, worked on that. And then a couple of years into that, I got offered a role in kind of brand management and the more corporate side of things, which I'd never thought I'd do. I never thought that was my path. And I followed that and chased that for a few new roles, and eventually ended up where I am now. So it's, That's my potted history.
And well potted it is. Now, before we get into your current role, Liz had brought up something prior in the pre-show, as we call it.
Yes.
So, Liz,
I'm really intrigued about the collaboration with Anthony Bourdain when you're at Balvenie, Raw Craft. So could you talk more about that?
Yeah, Rawcraft was kind of a real passion project. It came around, we had been working in some celebrity partnerships for a couple of years. And with us, along with a couple of colleagues, we sat down one summer and said, who would be kind of our blue sky partnership? Like, who would we absolutely want to work with? And the name Anthony Bourdain was thrown out, and we put it on a list. Said, imagine we could get Anthony Bourdain to work with us. He'd never worked with a brand before, and he had famously turned down some very famous brands. And a colleague of mine, Annie Taplin, and Annie made the first call, and we got some initial response that he would be interested. He liked the product. He liked whiskey. He had at the time been looking for the right partnership. So we went to his office with a bottle of 30-year-old we went to her office, to his manager's office, and continued the charm offensive and started the conversation. And then the job became about selling it back to the company. What he didn't exactly have the most polished of pasts when you're trying to do a booze partnership. And so we started to put together some ideas of what he would do for the brand. It made perfect sense. He obviously had some admiration for whiskey, for Scotch, for the provenance, and also for the brand. And then we brought in a couple of other creative partners, Rob and Paul, and the three of us started to build out this idea of Rawcraft. And it kind of went from strength to strength. And I think the most thrilling it was for me was when we took Tony to Scotland. A fun fact about that is in all the Scotland footage and all the pictures, he's actually wearing my jacket because he showed up in Scotland from the south of France without a jacket in Scotland in May. So he's wearing my kind of wax jacket for the whole shoot because he didn't bring a jacket with him. But we set it in a pub. So he's sitting in the Highlander Inn in Craigellachie, and he's meeting with the guys that work at the distillery, and we just sat there for an afternoon and just let the conversation flow, and then it all just edited together. So it was great. And he also did other things. He judged a craftsmanship award that we put together, and he put together the collection, which was a bunch of different crafts that he kind of curated. So it was great fun. So I worked with him for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and then I moved on to my new role and handed it over. So.
You did some really good films. There was an event here in town, a small theater, and you showed a film where he goes into it was a wood crafter. I forget what they were making, but I thought that was really good, and he was really good at interviewing. My personal experience with him was, a little less than fantastic, but that's okay. The man, I will not speak ill of the. Yeah, correct. Cheers.
So, did I hear correct that he put together a special blend, or did I? I
don't think he did it during my time. He watched David Stewart put together a ton 1509. To the best of my knowledge, he didn't, unless it happened after I left. But I don't know that he actually put together his own special blend. So
now you leave. Oh, sorry, Will or Lou. Did you have something to say?
No,
I saw your lips pursing.
No.
I was just going to close off with a huge fan of Anthony Bourdain. Just bought his new book, or a book. Well, not new book, but bought.
I'm delighted that you did, Liz, because actually Tony's assistant, Laurie Woolliver, who was his assistant when I was working with him, and Laurie was the person I went through for everything. Laurie's a wonderful human being. I'm delighted that she had already co-written a book with Tony while he was still alive. And I'm delighted that she's the one that gets to kind of carry his voice forward because she was so dedicated to supporting him. Even though she's a very gifted, very talented writer in her own right, she had kind of been doing double duty and being his co-author and also his kind of assistant. But Tony didn't have a big kind of entourage. He travelled everywhere alone. He was very low maintenance in that regard. But Laurie was always on the end of the phone when I needed her to kind of coordinate stuff. So she's the author, the co-author of this new book.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So excited to have that deliver in. Buy books. Go books.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's right. I think there's a guy down below you that would agree with that.
I absolutely agree with that.
How many of Lou Bryson's books do you have on the back shelf there?
Do you know, I have a couple, one in particular, which is one that he did for us a couple of years ago about Abuna and Alba. And that's my favorite of Lou's books.
Really? You did a specialty book?
Along with Noah and some other luminaries of the whiskey writing world.
Yeah, we put together something. Actually, I remember going up to New York and signing a whole lot of book plates for that. It was like an afternoon. We had to have several whiskeys to restore our hands after that.
Which, of course, whiskey is famous for.
It's famous for that.
Cures arthritis.
Yes.
Arthritis cramp.
You know, it even made the Sharpies write better. You know, you just dip it in there a little. And, that was a fun project. Like doing
that. So now, Andy, you at one point, obviously, you were at William Grant, 9 years?
Yeah.
And
man and boy.
That's
I'm not look old enough, but yeah, I was there for 9 years.
But then you jumped ship. I mean, were you one? Were you pushed out? You can tell us now. Were you pushed out?
You know, I God's honest truth is I never felt like I was running away from something. I was running to something. It was actually very difficult to leave William Grant's. Great company, great family company. Loved the people. Some of my best friends work there and have worked there. When this opportunity came around to go to a brand like Aberlour, which, you know, if you're not working on Balvenie, you may as well be. You know, Aberlour is also iconic. And I saw it as a great opportunity. I've always wondered why Aberlour wasn't as big as it should be in the States. You know, it's on the global stage, it's a top 10 single malt. It's the number one in France. And I've always wondered why doesn't it get the kind of attention it should get in this country. So that I saw that as a challenge. The job I was offered was to come over and be the kind of end-to-end, you know, business lead. So I was running it like a general manager would run it. And, you know, that kind of job doesn't really exist on a smaller brand. So I ran after the opportunity, and, you know, I've been here almost 4 years, 3.5 years, and it's amazing. I still get to kind of dabble in so many different aspects of the business. And you know, the mandate was to run it like you founded it, which is funny for a brand that's over 120 years old. But it's been a ton of fun. You know, it's I still get out and about, which is one of the things I missed about some of my more recent roles. You know, as you kind of climb the ladder, you get shackled to the desk. I used to get called the desk jockey in my early days of brand management because they knew how much it bothered me. Because one of the things I love about this industry is getting out and meeting people like yourselves and hanging out and meeting people who drink whiskey and hearing their stories and understanding why they fell in love with a particular whiskey or, you know, or spirit. So this job allowed me to continue a bit of that and also, you know, be kind of have a lot of autonomy as far as where the brand went. And it's been amazing the last 3 years to see it grow the way it has and to see the excitement people have for it.
Yeah, it's you know, I don't know. It wasn't the last time I saw you, but I saw you at here in Chicago. You were at Whiskey X.
Yeah.
At Soldier Field, and you guys had a line, and it was great to see that because, as I mentioned to you, Aberlour 10 was the single malt I used to bring to dinner parties during my bartending days. It's very affordable at the time. I'm not sure how much it costs now, but it was very affordable at the time, and it was a perfect dessert Scotch to me. And for a 10-year-old, I thought it was just amazing. And we. So when I saw you at the show, you had a line going out the freaking door just for your first booth. Of course, I think a lot of folks thought, you know, they're all very young whiskey drinkers, so I think they thought that's where the line started. They stop off at the Aberlour and then go on into the.
Well, I like to think it's because they wanted to get their hands on the best
of course.
Show. I mean, no, I think I remember that vividly actually, and. I think we had something special that we were pouring. I think it might have been an Illinois exclusive, and we made it known that there wasn't much of it. which, scarcity drives demand and all that. And we negotiated to be near the front of the room, I think, which helped.
You were the first
I
one.
have to say, the Whiskey X is a show I love because I think I like to refer to it as the democratization of whiskey. I think they brought the ticket price down. They went for a younger audience, and they proved that the whiskey drinker is not a monolith. It isn't an old guy drinking on a big leather tufted sofa. I think their audience was something like 48% female. It was extremely diverse, and so I got a kick out of going to that show because it's the stuff many of us in the industry have been saying for years. We need to understand that the whiskey drinker is way more diverse than anyone gives it credit for. And that's because we go into bars like Delilah's, like Newman's Kill in New York, which sadly hasn't survived the pandemic. And I used to go into Newman's Kill, and the audience was sometimes more than 50% female, and diverse in terms of lots of people of colour drinking whiskey. It to me was what the whiskey industry is, and I think that's what Whiskey X did. They took that and turned it into a show and made the ticket price so that a 27-year-old junior manager in an advertising firm could suddenly afford to go instead of spending $300 or $400 on a ticket. And what you get is a room full of people that are really kind of eager and impressionable and want to learn. And, I found a lot of the whiskey shows, they want to tell you. You stand behind the counter and people come in to actually educate you, which kind of defeats the purpose to me.
So, I get that impression at Whiskey Fest anymore where the price is getting up towards $400 a pop, and they want to come in and show you how much they know about your whiskey, which not a test.
Only select whiskeys. They'll go to they'll pop, they'll boot hop to skip over about 3 or 4 because they want to go. They
don't seem to want to taste anything new.
Yeah. They've also pre-gamed all afternoon, and by the time they get there, and then they start at Lagavulin 16 on the way in the door.
Yeah, right. They always do the island.
Help them with our space.
I need something more delicate.
Exactly. Give me a non-heated to finish off.
Sorry, Liz. You were going to ask a question?
I was just going to circle back to Whiskey X. So it sounds like, is that just happening in Chicago, or there's several cities, right? That's
there was a huge one in Brooklyn. I think they were planning one in Vegas. I don't think it actually happened because of the pandemic.
Right.
Nashville was on the Austin. They did a couple in Austin, and it was great. They had St. Paul and the Broken Bones playing, so it was kind of half music, half a live, half a whiskey show. So you would get a kind of cross-pollination of the band would bring a crowd, whiskey would draw a crowd, and then you kind of, the band's audience kind of embraced whiskey, and the whiskey's audience embraced new music. So to me, it was so refreshing, the concept. Yeah. And they would have, it was a scale event. You would get, 3,000 or 4,000 people instead of 150 people paying $400. Right. So I just loved the model.
And the band at the end,
geographical area too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Secondary cities. Yeah. Lou. Yeah.
The band would play at the end, so you have 2 or 3 hours of whiskey tasting, and then about an hour of the band.
Yeah.
So brands weren't competing against the music.
Yeah, they ended the whiskey tasting just as the music was starting. Although it's quite funny as you're rolling up your tablecloth and putting all your stuff away, there's still people coming up while the band's playing. Going, you stick another one in there. Yeah, there's always someone.
Actually, it makes sense. You can't listen to music, with an empty glass.
Yeah. But no, I think it was, and I love to see that kind of fresh approach, because it does acknowledge that the whiskey, kind of the dynamic of the whiskey drinker has changed, or maybe it was always like that, and we just didn't give cadence to it.
Well, and also the big companies, and actually the smaller companies should know this as well. The small distillers, is that your key demographic has always been that 25 to 35, because you want those guys for life. I don't know how much of that is true anymore. That brand loyalty. You might have some, but I think it's.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a very promiscuous consumer, isn't it? They might have 4 or 5 go-to whiskies, but you don't hear people walking in a bar and calling a whiskey the way they used to. Yeah. And you know what? Even as a brand person, I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think if you're comfortable with that, it shows that you have a a confidence in your own liquid that you're not worried that people aren't going to be only calling one brand. And even people that work in the business, we should be comfortable to talk about other people's whiskies. Because if you care, you know that every distillery has a story. Every distillery has a crew of people who each have a story about how they learned to make whiskey. And you know, that's exciting. And it's one of the great credits to Scotland that we've managed to maintain this very friendly kind of, to use a word that my company uses a lot, convivial attitude toward the production of what is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And we all drink each other's whiskies. We all talk about them. We all can celebrate their kind of singular features.
So you don't mind talking about other people's whiskeys, then what whiskeys do you hate, Andy? What competitors?
I try not to be a hater. I've got a couple of young kids at home, and we're in the process of eradicating the word hate from the house because they come up and screaming, I hate that. So no, I you know, listen, there are whiskies I probably tasted that didn't appeal to me, but I wouldn't say it's hatred. I just say it probably isn't to my palate, and that's a great thing, right? You know, so one person's favorite whiskey is another person's swill, and you know, each their own. I just want to say hello to Monique because I see that she's
Hey, Monique.
Monique Houston, yes,
star of the whiskey business. Monique is. One of my favorite whiskey memories is going to the Dundee Dell in 2009, 2010, and hanging out with Monique and BJ and all the crew up there. And what a place that is and was, particularly was when Monique was running it.
Yeah, they had at one point, I think they might have had the largest single malt Scotch collection in the States at that time.
Prior to the opening of Jack Rose in DC.
Probably Jack Rose.
I believe it was still the Dell.
It's like well over 800, and that's just single malts. So.
Yeah, and great fish and chips too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She says hello, guys.
Hello, guys.
That's my Monique voice. Hello, guys.
So yeah, back to your point, Andy, and I think just like building on that, it's also time and place, right? I think what I gravitate towards today might not be something I gravitate towards in 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, for various reasons. But I wanted to circle back to kind of what you said around the consumer and brand loyalty. Specifically, I'm going to put token millennial here, like consumer experience.
Step it up.
That's a big hat. Those millennials wear.
It's one of those cat in the hat things they wear.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of an Abraham Lincoln stovepipe hat. Yeah.
So I wanted to just ask you how that plays into the strategy, speaking to the consumer experience. And also I saw on your website that you guys are now very soon going to be back open to the public with your tours and tastings. So I was wondering if you could just talk to that consumer experience piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think the moment at which a consumer enjoys your product should be central to any decision that anyone in marketing makes. You have to think about that, what it means to them and why they make a decision to buy your product over another product. So I think it's, the consumer should be everything in the decisions that you make. And, when you start to understand your own brand, are people drinking it in bars and restaurants mostly, or are they taking it home? And when they take it home, what they doing with it? Whiskey for me is an accompaniment. It's punctuation to all these major events in your life. A colleague of mine once made an internal presentation about, he had a bit of a struggle working in the alcohol business. The negative side of thinking that you're working in an industry like alcohol. And he said, but he actually rationalizes to himself thinking that when somebody lifts a glass to cheers, think about all the moments in their life that our products have been part of those really special moments. And by the way, the not so special moments when we say goodbye to people. But when we go to graduations, when we welcome the birth, I remember the night my first child was born. I was by myself. I wasn't allowed to stay in the hospital. I went to the nearest bar, which I think was Caledonia in the Upper East Side of New York. And I had a really nice, very expensive whiskey. And I it was 21 years old, and it was me kind of welcoming my son. And I'll remember that moment for the rest of my life. So I think we have to take ourselves out of our marketing strategy templates and budgets and all the stuff that we spend our life looking at all day long, and remember that when it all comes down to it, this is a very important moment in time for people. And I love that idea. And so when it comes to the distillery, people cry when they get to the birthplace or the brand home of their favorite brands. It's an emotional, it's an out of body experience for some people, and I've witnessed it. And I think this isn't an old thing to allow people to tour a distillery. 50 years ago, distilleries were off limits. They were like biscuit factories. They were they were production houses. And I love that our country, maybe not before other countries, but we've embraced that. And now we have a malt whiskey trail, and our distillery is a 5-star visitor attraction. And actually, it was the first distillery. I give Ricky a lot of credit. Ricky created this concept of the to-go tasting kit, because so many people were showing up at the distillery and couldn't drink because they had to drive the car. So whoever was the designated driver gets to take the tasting kit away with them. So he made them into small bottles. Oh. So I'm still kind of thinking up new ways to improve the experience for people. And I remember long before I worked for Aberlour, I got the tour with Dennis, who was a famous tour guide at Aberlour years ago. And it's one of the distillery tours that I've always remembered because it was funny and it was authentic. And Aberlour Distillery, where it is set in this beautiful kind of natural wonderland. It's got the Lynn Falls up the hill, which sits in the foothills of Ben Rinnes. There's just nature all around it. And I just remember thinking, I was working for another company, but I had so much admiration and respect for the distillery. And probably one of the reasons I ended up running toward this opportunity.
And guys, Liz and Lou, I mean, you've been to a number of distilleries, and Liz, you're tasting whiskey spirits at distilleries, so maybe you can chime in on this. I always thought when you go to a distillery and you taste the whiskey at that distillery, there's something a little more heightened about it. I don't know whether it's the aromas in the air that you've been, you go on a tour and you're smelling all the makings, and then you go in.
You need to go and smell where it's made.
Yeah,
I really do. I think it's an important
amazing
part of it.
When I tasted Talisker on Skye, I had an epiphany. I go, oh my God, this smells like Skye. This tastes like Skye. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think that you've nailed it. I mean, to drink whiskey in the warehouse where it was made next to the distillery, there is something really kind of special about it. And I was the same, Marty. I remember going on a trip to Skye on a hiking trip, and I sat up next to the burning fire in the hotel and ordered a glass of Talisker, and it just drinking the product that you're drinking in the place that it's from, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's crazy.
I like to drink bourbon in a cornfield.
I appreciate that.
It is, but
I like it.
Full experience. I will say that most of the time I'm appraising whiskey or spirits, it is at the distillery, and unfortunately I have to be much more objective.
You're in the little white box. Is that?
You don't let the emotions run away with you.
Right. Yeah. It's a thing that being in the industry, in my role, as with my millennial hat, I have to put on consumer hat and distiller hat. So
does that hat fit through doorways and stuff? I'm just trying to picture how big that hat is. It just looks
it's
really
like
big.
a Swiss Army hat.
That is, yeah, really.
Liz, I was born in 1980, so I'm technically not a millennial. But
right.
some people consider me a millennial, and I'm quite happy about that.
I killed my first man. Andy, I killed my first man in 1980, so that's interesting.
It's a memoir he recounted in his book, The Evil Friendship.
I'll look out for it.
Yeah. Here's that book. So just look that up, The Evil Friendship. That's in there. Hey, tell us more about Aberlour itself, the distillery and the brand, because like I said, I used to love it, and then The 10, I believe, was taken off the market, and so I became disconnected. I've never visited the distillery. Of all the distilleries in Scotland I've gone to, I've never been able to get there. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, we'll come and see us when we reopen. It's quite exciting. I think Friday was the first day Scotland opened up to people being able to travel outside their own kind of zip code. So we're going to start seeing, and I think the Highlands were gridlock on Friday because everyone's like heading for the Highlands and they're looking for some fresh air. But no, Aberlour is simplest. It's probably the best whiskey that some people have never heard of or tried. It's kind of a bit of an unsung gem in this market, at least. It's the distillery in terms of where it is. It's eponymous to the Charleston or the town of Aberlour, which is right at the kind of the opening as you go north from points south from Aviemore and Granton. You drive past Glenfarclas. Well, first of all, you drive past Tormore, which I always think is kind of a real unsung gem in terms of one of the most beautiful distilleries in Scotland. And then you keep going north. And you'll go around past Ballindalloch and then you'll have Glenfarclas on the right. As you enter Aberlour, our distillery is right in the town on the right-hand side. And Aberlour is a kind of fascinating little town. There's less than 1,000 people live there. And at one end of the street, you've got this distillery that makes 4 million litres of alcohol a year and is one of the top 10 selling single malts in the world. On the left-hand side, you have some of the most desired fishing beats, salmon fishing beats anywhere in the world. And at the other end of the street, which is less than a mile away, you have the Walker Shortbread Factory, where all these little iconic Walker's shortbread cookies are made all over the world. So when you want to talk about punching above your weight in commerce, this little town of 1,000 people it has to be up there. And it's a beautiful place. The town itself, it's little shops. It has the Mash Tun, which is a great place to go and get lunch. Our distillery was built in 1879 by James Fleming, whose name is still everywhere in the town. He was a kind of local businessman. He was a grain merchant. He was a banker. He became a distiller, and then he wanted to build his own distillery. But for him, he was a kind of early day philanthropist. He wasn't just about making whiskey so he could make money. He saw it as an important component of community growth, and he wanted to provide employment for the people in his community. Something that's still happening with a lot of these new distilleries that are being built. And when he died, he believed in giving most of what he had made back. So he built the bridge across the Spey with his legacy, the Penny Bridge, or the Victoria Bridge, but now called the Penny Bridge because he was quite a smart guy, and he said, if I build this bridge and no one maintains it, it's only going to fall down. So he set it up so that you'd have to pay a penny to cross it. You don't have to pay the penny today, we're happy to say, but the bridge still exists because they had set that up so that it would continue to kind of, the fulfilling, it would self-fulfill. And he built that bridge because he heard of a young boy who died trying to cross the river by foot. And he knew that it was important to have a safe passage across the River Spey up toward the Macallan area. He also built the community hall in town, which was about bringing the community together. And he built the hospital, which right now there are people getting their COVID-19 vaccinations in. So this guy in 1879 did all these wonderful things that are all still in use today. And probably the most well-known of his contributions, certainly the most well-known is his whiskey, Aberlour. But locally, he is known for so much more and for being a great believer in purpose and community. In terms of the whiskey, we're known for using sherry casks. The other whiskies in the area are known for using sherry casks. But we have most of our whiskies are double casks. So we use both bourbon and sherry casks for, concurrently. It's not a finished whiskey, but the 12-year-old, the 16 and the 18 have whiskies that have aged both bourbon over here and sherry over here for the full age, and then are brought together to the house style. And then, of course, a Buna, which is our kind of cult favourite. Anyone who knows about Aberlour usually asks about a Buna, which in the 1990s was a real trailblazer. It was cask strength. It was exclusively aged in sherry casks, sherry butts. It was a pretty pure expression of a distillery, and that sort of thing didn't really exist on the wide open market in the late 90s, and has sustained as something that's a great conversation starter, and probably the reason a lot of people are still passionate about Aberlour.
Wow. That bridge, by the way, going back to that, I think it was a year or two after 9/11. Evan Katnack, our friend Evan, brought the Masters of Whiskey there to commemorate. We were standing there at the moment the towers came down to commemorate the
really?
anniversary. Yeah, right on the Penny Bridge. It was beautiful. And we had a bagpiper playing Amazing Grace at the same time. Very sad. It was a very sad moment. But very memorable.
It is one of those moments, along with Kennedy, and you know where you were when that happened. So
yeah.
I was in the basement myself.
You were in the basement?
I was literally in my office in the basement. I was editing photographs that morning for some reason.
Oh,
and didn't know anything at all happened until 9:30 when my dad sent me an email.
Oh, really? I woke up to the radio announcing it. I was supposed to go do a promotion that morning here in Chicago, and I went downtown, and they had closed.
You were in Scotland, Marty. On the bridge, the paper.
No. This is on the anniversary.
Oh, right.
You commemorate it.
Your story had holes all over it there, Marty.
No, I said it was a year or two after, mister. Somebody has a little haggis in their ears.
Could we kind of switch channels here? I wanted to ask brand manager versus brand ambassador. What's the permit? What are you doing? You're steering the brand, or
a little
how's that work?
More money for a whole lot less fun. if you need me to sum it up,
that's quite succinct. I like that.
A little bit more money for a little bit less fun. I think being a brand ambassador is the job that I would go back to in a heartbeat, were it not for I'm married with 2 kids and it's harder to live that lifestyle. It was some of the best memories and experiences of my life. I mean, my life as a brand ambassador was way more exciting and way more glamorous as my life as an actor ever was. The places I went to, the people I met. Whisky opens doors everywhere you go. You meet the most fascinating people. Everyone's always in a good mood because you're pouring whiskey. I mean, what's not to like about that job? You get up in a room full of people and you tell a bunch of crap jokes that you nicked off a bunch of third-rate, second-hand comedians in Scotland. People are rolling around laughing. Dad jokes for days. And the instant gratification that you get in that job is just unbelievable. And I have to say, I was a beneficiary of what I always call unwarranted credibility. I was in a business surrounded by people who knew a lot more than I did, but I was a Scottish guy, so I got all this unwarranted credibility. And I used to say, actually, Heather Green over here, she knows more than I do, or Sam Simmons over there, go and ask him because he knows more than I do. So I learned. I worked hard. I remember meeting Jim McEwen once, and he said, I went to Braveheart years ago, and Jim, said, listen, never take this business for granted. Never spend your company's money like it's going out of fashion. Think about it as your own. And every time you're on an airplane, put your head in a book. And so I took that really to heart, and I really kind of knuckled down and made myself become more really, truly credible. And I love this industry. I can't imagine working anywhere else. And the people I've met, it's just fabulous. So the transition to brand manager was a very difficult one. You no longer got that instant gratification of people laughing at your jokes or telling you how wonderful everything was. And suddenly you're the one who has to make the decisions and has to, make budget decisions and run campaigns that people don't necessarily think are that great. And so you're kind of in the hot seat. But you do get the opportunity to steer the ship and to create things that will come about a year's time, 2, 3, 4 years' time. And you have a bit more influence when it comes to the creation of new products. So I built a great rapport with David Stewart at Balvenie and the global team. Sam Simmons is a very close friend of mine. And, we were part of building something globally, which was great. And then at Aberlour, the same thing. I work very closely with Graham Cruikshank and Sandy Hislop and the global team at Aberlour. And, we pushed really hard to get a Boona Alba launch, for example. And that was, I probably wouldn't have been able to do that as a brand ambassador. So now, then you move forward kind of brand director level, and so your responsibilities grow and your exposure to the big senior management probably grows as well, and that comes with its perils. It's not all you're kind of in the hot seat and you're the one that has to answer the questions, be them good or bad. But I'd recommend it. I when I was first offered the opportunity to move into brand management, I was completely unqualified. I was surrounded by people that had fancy MBAs from big schools. And quite honestly, I left school at 16 to be a professional actor. I didn't even have a bachelor's degree. I had to send myself back to night school to do my degree to catch up. So when I was working 60 hours a week as a brand manager and traveling 100 days a year, I was going to online night school to get my degree in business and marketing. And so I kind of did it the difficult way around. And I turned that job down a few times because why would I give up what I had? And some very smart and some very good, caring people who kind of looked out for me said, you've got potential, and we think we see you, going further in this business, and it would be a great loss if you just, had the blinkers on and stayed in being a brand ambassador. So that's why I love this job, because it kind of allowed me to do both. And I have a team of great brand ambassadors as well, Colin and Gemma and Brian. But every once in a while, I come out of retirement and show up at something, which is great.
Well, I always tell small brands, they'll call me and they'll ask me, hey, do you know somebody who can be a brand ambassador in Chicago? And I go, really? You want to hire a brand ambassador? Yeah, part-time, maybe $15 an hour or something like that. And I go, you ain't going to get anybody kind of worth their salt.
You get a dog walker for $15 an hour.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's little old ladies sampling cheese at the local grocery store and make work of that. Yeah. So I'll tell them, why don't you save your bucks or combine them, especially if you're looking for brand ambassadors in a number of markets, hire a brand manager. They can do what a brand ambassador does, but also manage your brand, deal with the distributors. Brand ambassadors can't do that. I think a brand manager, true, it doesn't have all the great perks because you have a lot more responsibility and you have to deal with paperwork and it's not as glamorous. But
it's not. I mean, listen, there are worse industries to work in. Yeah. I've got friends who sell much less glamorous things than booze, and their conferences sound like purgatory to me. Whereas our conferences are fun, and we meet great people. So I try not to complain about it. I used to have in my bio just 2 words: lucky bastard. I consider myself a really lucky little bastard. I grew up
on your tombstone.
I mean, it should be along with first guy to move to New York to get a show business. I mean, I'm so lucky, and I never take any of it for granted. And I've tried to take people under my wing in the way that people took me under their wing, and ask them questions. What is important to you? What is it you want out of this? Because if it's all the kind of superficial stuff, then you're probably in the wrong business. If you're doing this because you were a bartender and you think that this is going to be lots of travel and an expense account, those are all the wrong reasons to take the job on, and it's never going to last. Whereas if you see it as an opportunity to be the vehicle to get people to fall in love with what is a really exciting product, you're on the right track there, And yes, all the other stuff comes, but that should be secondary. We now have we've always had an obligation to lift other people up, and I see a lot more of that now. I think we've become a lot less self-serving and a lot more empathetic as an industry, and I think we're in a really interesting moment at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. When I was a brand ambassador, I because everybody had been coming over from Scotland were Scottish. They had you had Evan gotten that big old hailing gay folks like this name, and then they slapped a kilt on this Irish kid from the southwest side of Chicago, and so go talk about Scotch to people and go, they're expecting Evan. So that's why I started doing the Scottish accent. I'd start with that and then I drop it and say, sorry, I'm actually from the southwest side of Chicago.
But I like to think that people don't expect it as much now.
I think now
people are much more interested because of people, frankly, like Heather and like Monique and who have reshaped the what people think of as a brand ambassador should be, and they come through. People ask them a question, they know the answer. Yeah. Speaking of which, someone's asked what the average age of a Boona is, and does it change with each batch? The average age is not something that to be honest with you, even Sandy would tell me. We know it's at least 2 years. We know there's stuff that's much older than it needs to be in there, and the reality is, yes, it changes with every batch, but the control sample is the control sample. So they're always trying to reach a certain flavor. So it's less about what the age is, and it's more about does this produce what we're ultimately looking for in a Buna. So sorry if that wasn't as...
And maybe you can walk through what that profile is.
Yeah, the profile is, I mean, some people call a Buna the beast. You heard it called beast before? It's it whacks you around the face. It's like, whoa. But it's also not as ferocious as you might imagine for something that's 120 proof. So it's typically around 60% alcohol. So I think I would describe a Buna as intense, but not fearsome. You know, it's really intense. It's 100% sherry cask.
Okay.
It's cask strength, so it's 60% usually, and it's just full-bodied and rich as it comes, but also really sweet. And I think it's pretty accessible for what it is. Like I'm always surprised with people who aren't even whiskey drinkers who go, I actually prefer the Abuna, which says something about their palate. My wife, for example, doesn't really drink whiskey, and she loves Abuna. So I think it's some people it just suits them, and it's big in every possible way, but it's really enjoyable, and the finish is incredible.
I got hired by one of your. She was a former Diageo brand manager or market manager, and she moved over to Pernod, and she couldn't get any of your brand ambassadors, so she hired me. Hello, for like a week to go travel through Michigan and Pennsylvania, and we were tasting out that Aberlour double matured. Oh my God, we were tasting it against some other very well known sherry aged single malts, my friend, and they were like $140 less. And I go, oh my God, I would jump over cases and cases of this other brand to get to that one bottle. They were so good. They were just, they're like juicy.
Yeah, like I say, I think Aberlour is, and again, part of the reason I ran at this opportunity is it really is an unsung gem. And when it comes to the age range, the 12, 16, and 18, I'd take them toe to toe with any other brand in their category. And blind taste as much as we want, because I'm pretty confident that it's going to stand up. And then when people learn that it's not 150, 100, $200 a bottle, they're pleasantly surprised.
Oh, that's it. Monique says it was always my go-to to get bourbon fans over to single malt. The proof, the mouthfeel. No, she's talking about the Abunda.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Dried fruit.
Hey, go ahead, Lizard.
I was going to say Sam, also in response to your comment, Andy says, it's still a pleasure every time with every batch. So,
well, I'm not going to take any credit, Sam. I'm going to say that the team worked to put it together. Will be delighted to hear you say it.
Andy's being modest. It's all him.
I like to drink it. I don't make it.
Every time you enjoy a glass of Aberlour, it's because of him.
And Abuna, you remember how to say it because Abuna Matata.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It means no place for the rest of your days.
It means what? No place for the rest of your days?
It doesn't really mean that. It means the original or of the origin. But I think Matata or Hakuna Matata means no worries for the rest of your days. But Disney didn't allow me to say that. So,
Wow.
Disney really loves attaching their children cartoons to adult beverages.
Yeah.
I like about
I'll get my resume and my coat.
Yeah.
Whiskies like Abuna and the Ardbeg Uigeadail. I mean, it's always the perfect answer to people who say, "Well, NAS whiskeys are just cheap. They don't want to give you a proper age statement." Like, really? Do you have a problem with these two whiskeys?
Yeah. And also on that, Lou, the debate about it being a kind of a trend or a fad. 1997.
Yeah.
The team kind of put Abuna out into the market. So, if it's a fad, it's a pretty long-term one.
And, the thing with age, you always get back to this, but the thing with age, the only reason I like trying old.
Is that your urine sample?
It's trying out.
Marty, we need
trying out for a new company. So yes, and that is 100 proof urine. No, this is so older whiskey. That's 27-year-old Little Mill, And the only thing I find really fascinating about tasting older whiskey is going way back to what you said before about people who craft it, and the fact that you might taste a whiskey that was crafted before you were born, definitely before Liz was born, most of the time. Yeah,
Truth.
that's how I usually judge it now, Liz. Is this BL?
We were drinking a bunch of whiskeys last night. They were all pre-Liz.
Yeah,
Liz.
before Liz.
Before Liz. BL.
I agree with that, Murray. I think that's really exciting, particularly if you know, and that's a good thing about single malt versus blends. You can probably track who the 6 or 7 people were working at the distillery in that particular year. You could put names on it. You know, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And I just turned 40, and you know, the idea of drinking whiskey that's older than me now is a very kind of exciting prospect. It's getting harder and almost certainly cost prohibitive at this point, but
it's still at the same time the flavors of younger whiskeys. I mean, again, I compare it to people. You know, you get a young Frank Sinatra. Liz, he was a singer, kind of a famous singer for many decades.
Very familiar with his work.
Okay, all right. Just gotta put that
There
out.
you go.
But compared to an old Frank, where he's basically just talking, talking his songs.
yeah.
So there is that kind of.
And also, don't forget that we got really much better at wood management in the kind of 80s and 90s. You know, these were receptacles in any time before the kind of 80s and 90s. We really got wise. We hired wood management teams. We put in place, and I mean we, the industry, we put in place very important relationships with cooperages and bodegas, and so our wood management suddenly became a really important thing. So actually, young whiskey benefited from that in ways that older whiskey, which might have been a fluke. Really good old whiskey could have just been a fluke, whereas the young whiskey that gets to an older age, whiskeys say from the 90s to now, you know you're going to get a good well-aged whiskey because it's more deliberate.
And it's a thing where everyone's always, everyone loves the romance of the old ways. You go to a distillery and you heard, 40 guys used to work at this distillery, and now it's only 2. Everything's automated. But you got to realize, distilleries were like Chicago city workers. A lot of them might have been working there because they were friends of somebody.
Or you needed 5 guys because they were all dramming.
Yeah, right. Or that you had one guy who was watching a still, making sure it didn't boil, so you can just turn one knob, as opposed to no, I can just have that automatically done. And so, it's not as a romantic, but it also saves costs, which lowers the price of your bottle for you.
Makes more consistent whiskey.
More consistent whiskey.
Almost always.
Yeah. So
on the other hand, I mean, I've also heard guys argue who don't have highly automated distilleries. They argue that the people who are doing it don't have as deep an understanding of what's actually going on.
Yeah, but do they need it? And
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do they?
That's the question.
I want to tell a great story about it was a warm summer's day, and the something was happening with the new make. It wasn't, when they brought it in to do analysis on it, just wasn't the same. And they thought it was the weather, and it turned out it was the height of the Stillman. He was like a really short guy, where the other Stillman had been like, so he was looking down at the cut, where the other guy was looking up at the cut. and the hydrometer reading was so different because one was looking away up at the
God.
So there's some interesting and really fun variables.
That's good.
See? Plus, like the Talisker distillery, didn't it blow up because when the guys decided to smoke inside the still house one time? That's kind of stuff the machine won't do.
Never should do that.
Never do that. That's coming up with
my days, because my day I was every time I took a camera into Stillhouse, I had to take 50 people from the health and safety department and the wee gas meter that beeps.
What is it with cameras? Is there? Are they really that?
I don't know.
Spark prone?
Well, it is a spark, isn't it? The light.
Yeah,
it's
like the TSA.
They tell me I can't take pictures with a cell phone.
You can't take a little trial pack of Pantene shampoo on a plane. But you have a cell phone that's much more dangerous. I think it's the same with distilleries.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, hell, some of those Samsungs actually did blow up on planes, right?
that is true. Yeah.
I have my shampoo.
It's a blanket, risk analysis. But there's probably a confidentiality piece to it too.
I had my beer shampoo confiscated in Prague right after a little old couple brought on 3 bottles of high proof spirit that they bought in the duty free because my bottle of shampoo was just it was too many ounces. And I thought, what am I going to do? Shampoo the pilots to death? These people have flammable liquid. What's the difference? Explain to me, Mr. Czech person.
Marty, you're so high maintenance.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Andy, I want to go back to whiskey shows because it appears that whiskey shows are going to come back starting in the fall. Many of them are planning to happen. However, this might be a good time for whiskey shows to maybe rethink things a bit because so many Whiskey Fest was such a huge success over the last 2 decades. So many have tried to emulate it. But, they have the magazine, which is a big boost to them. But a lot of them, it's still just walking around and you taste and, is there a way, is there something you'd like to see whiskey shows change that would benefit both the brands and the consumers?
Well, I mean, I think, like I was saying earlier, I think Whiskey X has taken steps in the right direction by the democratization, by making it more, whiskey doesn't need to be always considered this exclusive thing. Right. I've always thought there are too many barriers to whiskey. And once people take the effort to get over those barriers, they fall in love because it's delicious and intriguing and mysterious. And there are 7 times as many flavor compounds in a glass of whiskey as there are in a glass of wine. But people who drink wine, they go, well, it smells like 2 love-struck teenagers skipping through a meadow on a wet Wednesday morning. They get excited, we need more people to get that excited about whiskey, but they've been told you can't drink it a certain way. You can't put ice in it. You can't put water in it. Don't do this. You have to say, we're going to make it hard to say. And I'll just like, bugger it. I'll just have a vodka soda. And so I think the shows, frankly, have been, and by the way, so have the brands, have created that fence around whiskey. And anyone who can take steps to democratize whiskey and to show a more reflective representation of who is out there drinking whiskey, and make it about keep leaning into the enjoyment of it. The education is important, so have that component. But if it's just for geeks, the geeks half the time are there to tell everyone else how much they know. They're not really there to enjoy whiskey as much as some of the new people who are coming in and who have an open mind and who are willing to try anything and will give you an immediate opinion of it. So, and by the way, I'll just say, I think the last year has been really informative in terms of the great work that's been done online. I mean, look at the work Becky Paskin's done with Out the Air Whiskey Festival, which was entirely online. And, we as a brand, we've sampled more consumers in COVID era than pre-COVID.
Wow.
We've discovered that there are a lot of people who are really passionate about whiskey who can't be bothered leaving their house or who just can't make it out to an event at night. And so you give them a Zoom code and figure out a way to get them a sample, and they'll jump on and they love it. And so we actually are going to continue doing events online post-COVID. So I think these festivals are going to have to figure out how do we counter that. It's not just about these major metropolitan areas that there are whiskey drinkers all over the place who don't want to jump in the car for 2 hours or fly somewhere for the experience.
Do you think that there's been some new learnings with the consumer set with these virtual sessions in terms of like minority or, like you said, secondary cities? Has that been sort of a new learning? Because again, like to your previous comment, maybe Whiskey Fest were, just in these primary cities or just men. Maybe the female population who really enjoys whiskey weren't able to, come out to the event because they are caregivers or what have you. So just kind of curious about that.
Well, before COVID hit, most of our events were happening in workplaces, actually. We were going into people's offices and doing a whole tastings. And I think that speaks to how progressive a lot of companies are, particularly in tech and startup world. And so we were finding that the audiences were entirely reflective of the population at large. Because when you go into an office, it generally is much more diverse than, a big whiskey event in a fancy ballroom somewhere.
Yeah.
So we were already finding that. So when you just take that into the virtual world, absolutely. We are really proud that the events that we've been doing are, as I said, reflective of the population at large. And that's not a surprise to me, because I've been in these whiskey bars and I've seen the people who drink whiskey, and they're not just a bunch of guys. A lot of my female friends, particularly in this business, could run rings around most of the guys who consider themselves whiskey drinkers. Cheers to that, absolutely. I include myself in that, by the way. And so I think absolutely the online concept is the democratization, be it about the inclusion perspective, in terms of cultural background, but also the geographical inclusion.
Yeah.
And this is a massive country with a lot of rural communities who are completely underserved by these experiences. And all you need is and I get it, not everyone has good internet. That is another conversation that needs to be had. But for those who do, it's opened up a whole new world for them, and they don't want the world to go back. A lot of people, by the way, the number of times we're going to hear people saying, I miss COVID. It's going to be the most said thing in September. Because I've got friends that are crushing COVID. They were born for COVID. They like leaving the house. They don't like people. It's great.
Wow, I can see that. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that has to be just COVID, though. You can hate people.
No, but I mean, they've loved the fact that they don't need to leave the house to get access to these great experiences.
Well, they can do their work at home, and they don't have to go in and do all the bullshit in the office.
And if you get samples sent to you, you don't have to worry about driving home from a whiskey event.
Yep.
So all of that stuff, we're going to have a serious reflection when COVID's over about the stuff that we thought was important before this pandemic. Now, I am not for a second. I mean, I've lost people. My sister and brother-in-law work in the front lines. I'm not for a second downplaying the negative impact of COVID. It's been devastating. But I think it has provided, I'm always a kind of glass half full. I'm trying to find the silver lining. I think, and I said this to people at the very beginning, we are going to see the best and the worst in humanity. I said the next 6 weeks, little did I know it would be the next year or so. I also said we're going to catch a breath and we're going to learn to live. Is the handshake dead? Discuss. Are we now not going to make people work in the office 5 days a week? Are we now going to wear masks on the subway the way they do in large parts of Asia? And is there not going to be a thing such as the flu anymore? I mean, these are all really intriguing discussions. And in our world, now that's all very kind of abstract, but in our world, I think it's really exciting that we've found a new way to connect with people who love to talk about whiskey and who love to drink whiskey. And none of us need to burn a bunch of, CO2 into the atmosphere to get to these people, to talk to them. I think overall it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, personally, I miss the shows. I mean, I miss the shows not because, like I said, I think a lot of the shows need to change up the format. Also for some brands, because once people come in, they hit 10 tables and there's, say, 45 at least at some of these shows. All right, you've hit 10 tables. Now that means you have 35 more to go. And now your palate is, you're not going to remember anything. It would have to be so. But usually one of the reasons why you might remember a brand is because of that person behind the table pouring it, which is always very important.
Yeah, I've always said a good brand ambassador is likable, memorable, and credible. And the memorable bit is really quite critical. We always focus on the credible bit. You know, did they work in a fancy restaurant that was world renowned? And yes, you send them on the road to be a brand ambassador. But you can't teach people to be likable. And actually, you can't teach people to be memorable in a positive way. And so I think you're right, Marty. You know, brand ambassadors frame that whole first impression of a brand in ways that people don't really take seriously enough. I'm with you, Marty. I miss being around people. I'm a people person. I really struggled. I've been starved of that the last year, and I can't wait to get back out and to meet people. But I think the positive is that we're going to be much more choiceful about the things that we choose to go to, and about how we choose. We know now that we have choices and we have options. We don't have to go to everything. And the other thing I was going to say about your point earlier about people who go to these whiskey shows and they get around 100 or 50 booths, they spend $400 on the ticket, so they're trying to get their money's worth.
I know, yeah.
And that's the great thing about Whiskey X and any other show that chooses to take that more accessible path, is that people, you know, they're in it for $60 or $70. It's a lot of money, but it's not that they haven't just spent a month's rent on it or a week's rent, so they don't feel like they need to get $500 worth of whiskey in their body in the quickest possible period of time.
Actually, you know, it's funny because they're so young, most of them. I went to about 4 or 5 of those shows, and they're so young that they're a little intimidated, and they do want to learn. I mean, you start talking to them about whiskey, they have no idea.
They're sucking it up.
Yeah, they know it's old guy drink. Well, why is this different? Oh, it's not as bad as I thought.
And that's my point. And I've been lucky enough to be part of that first discussion with so many people who are new to whiskey. And they have this aha moment. They're like, I never thought I liked whiskey. And of course, they've all been told that Scotch smells like a wet dog and tastes like a Band-Aid, and it's like an old lick in an ashtray. And you know, 1 out of the top 10 selling single malts in the world is peated. So, you know, I think that's a great thing that we've been able to teach people. Actually, forget all the misconceptions. And I know these are hard words to say, and I know it's really strong, but give it time, give it a chance. And 9 times out of 10, people are like, wow. You know, especially if you teach them the relationship with water. It's a great experience, and I've count myself very fortunate to have been around for a lot of those interactions.
Well, Aberlour is a great. I hate the term newbie, and I hate you know, even the introduction, because it just sounds so. It makes the person feel like, oh, I guess I got to earn my stripes or something. No, it's a drink. Drink it. If you enjoy it, great. But it's
some more.
It's a wonderful whiskey to show folks, hey, you know what? This isn't the boogeyman that you might have imagined it was.
And I think what I think is unique about Aberlour is that it sits in this really interesting cross junction of being approachable. It's sweet, it's approachable, it's not going to blow your brain off, but it's also nuanced and complex. And so when you're in that situation, you bring people in, but they don't leave, they don't move on, they don't feel the need to move on, because there's so much more to the whiskey. And I think that if more people knew that, Aberlour would be definitely one of the most popular single malts in the US market. Working on it.
That's one of the things that bugs me about whiskeys that people choose to get their friends started on whiskey with. So often they're presented as something that you will then move on from.
Right, exactly.
Why?
No, if you liked it, if it's what got you started.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got started. My first single malt Scotch was Springbank, and I have been jonesing for it ever since.
And my first Irish was Black Bush, and I was just drinking it over the weekend.
Oh my God!
Why stop?
That's my go-to.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law is actually the site engineer on the distillery expansion at Bushmills right now.
Oh God! Huge project! Wow.
Yeah.
Boy, you are connected.
Absolutely.
Speaking of getting to know Aberlour, there's a link to the website. So if you want to learn more about it, there's a green little rectangle at the bottom of the screen. So give that a little click check it out.
And I'll just say on that link, Liz, if it's aberlourallAccess.com, anybody who goes to that link will have the opportunity to have a live conversation with one of our brand ambassadors. So we keep them, speaking about desk jockeys, we keep them chained to the desk. And, anytime somebody wants to have a live chat, either what we find is we've got QR codes in liquor stores. People scan the code and they can have a text message interaction with a brand ambassador. You can ask them any questions about, not just Aberlour, any whiskey question they have. So we're trying to be the whiskey helpline. Don't you ask, Lou? You'll ask 2 different questions. And the other thing they can do on there is there's a personalization opportunity for anyone in the US only, I should say. They can actually have up to 3 characters added to a nice leather band, which will be shipped to them, and it hangs off the side of the bottle. I don't have one here. But you can do that on that site as well.
Nice.
So
Not much is necessary.
Are your brand ambassadors like clamped into a chair with eye clamps, keeping their eyeballs open like Malcolm McDowell and Clockwork
Have you
Orange?
ever seen Office Space? They're like, what's his name in Office Space? Looking for his stapler. They're in the basement.
Very good.
You've seen it? Wow.
Yeah.
It's all about flair, right? It's all about flair.
Yes. All the pieces.
Liz always wears 15 pieces of flair. She could wear more though. Hey, one real quick question. You're still involved in acting, yeah? You're aren't you on the board of the New York Scottish Theatre?
Oh, no. So I'm on the board of the National Theatre for Scotland, National Theatre of Scotland, which is so it's a Scottish organisation that has a US arm, and I sit on the board alongside Alan Cumming. Actually, he's on the board, and a bunch of other very interesting people. And my relationship with acting now is limited to a handful of times a year when I stand up and speak Burns, or I do this thing called the Pipes of Christmas every Christmas, which is a live concert in New York and New Jersey where they bring a pipe band and a brass band, and I stand up and read a bunch of poetry alongside my cousin James Robinson, who they bring over from London. And then I go on the Burns circuit every year. I do a bunch of Burns suppers, and other than that, and voiceovers, I do some occasional voiceover work. Other than that, I'm too busy with trying to raise a family and work and all the other stuff. Wow, and I don't really miss it, Marty, to be honest. I occasionally go to see a play. I try and go and see when in normal times I see a lot of theatre, and I watch a ton of movies and TV. And every once in a while I'll see a performance and I think, it would be nice to be in that seat again. But then you remember very quickly that all the other nonsense that goes on behind all the auditions and not getting a phone call and figuring out how you're going to pay your mortgage or your rent. And when I first moved to New York in 2005, everyone kept saying, so you're going to try acting here? And it was only a couple of weeks in, and I was like, every time I've been in a bar or a restaurant, the person who serves me tells me they're an actor. And they're probably much more talented than I ever was. They can dance, they can sing, they've been trained at Juilliard, they're better looking than I am. Why? What in the world does the acting business need me trying to go up against them for jobs? So I don't miss it most of the time.
Well, I still want to see you perform in as the Artful Dodger and Oliver. So if there's a performance coming up, let us know.
I think that was 1995, and I'm almost certain
it's anything for you. Come on, anything.
No, you're doing great, Marty. You're doing great.
Anything for you. See,
I gave up when my voice broke. Obviously, you didn't.
All right, Mister, take us out.
Yeah, we're running up on time, Andy. It's been really super having you on, so thank you for joining us. Very entertaining. You mostly, Marty. But I did want to just take a brief second before we wrap up here to introduce our guest for next week. We have Colin Solman at Kings County Distillery. So right here over in my neck of the woods in the New York City area. So really excited to have him on next week. So click the link, sign up. That'll be an exciting show. But in the meantime, Andy, again, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great fun. Cheers.
Drink
Good
deep,
time.
everyone.
Great to see you.
You too. Cheers, Liz. Cheers, Marty.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.